evening, good Vok Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Wait, it's not scrolling on me. Okay, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Shandor in the Bronx, Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella, Elanit in Silver Spring, Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. No short dafs in Tractate Sanhedrin. Our daf tonight is page 45 here in Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. We're making our way through chapter 6 tonight, opening Mishnah number 4, which with God's help will finish, and open Mishnah number 5 and finish that, and then open Mishnah number 6. We begin right at the bottom of page 44b. When the condemned man is at a distance of 4 cubits from the place of stoning, they take off his clothes, and they cover a man's private parts in the front, and a woman is covered both in the front and in the back. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, meaning the minority opinion. But the rabbis say a man is stoned, he's executed by stoning, naked, i.e. wearing only that cloth covering. But a woman is not stoned naked. Rather, she is stoned while clothed. That's the Mishnah. Now, top of page 45a, the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that a man is stoned naked, but a woman is not stoned naked. So with regard to this matter, the sages taught in a related baraisa, they cover a man's private parts with 1 piece of cloth in the front, and a woman is covered with 2 pieces of cloth, both in the front and in the back, because all of that area is nakedness, which may not be viewed. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. But the rabbis say a man is stoned naked, but a woman is not stoned naked. So the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning behind the opinion of the rabbis who say that a man is stoned naked, but a woman is not? And the Gemara answers, the verse states, and all the congregation shall stone him. Leviticus 24:14. So what does the verse intend to teach when it emphasizes that they stone him? If we say that this verse serves to teach that they stone only him, the man, but not her, which would mean women are not punished with stoning, even if they committed a crime that merits the death penalty of stoning, well, then there is a difficulty. As isn't it written explicitly? Deuteronomy 17:5, and you shall bring forth that man or that woman and stone them with stones until they die. So rather, what does the verse mean to teach when it stresses that they stone him? If he is a man, they stone just him, without his clothes. But if the condemned party is a woman, they stone her with her clothing. So Rabbi Yehuda says the emphasis on the word him teaches that they stone him alone, i.e. without his clothes. But as is the case with all other punishments stated in the Torah, there is no difference for a man and no difference for a woman, meaning the same law applies in both men and women. The Gemara asks, is this to say that the rabbis are not concerned that the sight of a naked woman will arouse sexual thoughts among the onlookers? And Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about such sexual thoughts? But didn't we hear... So the rabbis are concerned, right, that the sight of this naked woman going out to be executed will arouse sexual thoughts among the onlookers. But Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about such sexual thoughts. But this is going to raise a contradiction between a statement of Rabbi Yehuda here and Rabbi Yehuda in another place. But didn't we hear these parties, right, the majority versus Rabbi Yehuda, say just the opposite, hold opposing points of view, just the opposite positions, as we learned in a Mishna tractate, sota, right? So sota is going to be the laws of the suspected adulteress who goes through the ritual, right? We've talked about this many times. When a woman, according to Torah law, has engaged in suspicious behavior, secluding with herself, being with a man who's not her husband, so that she is suspected of adultery. And then her husband warns her and says specifically, do not seclude yourself with that man. You're arousing suspicion. And then she secludes herself with that man again, and witnesses see it, right? So then the husband can divorce her or, challenge her to prove her innocence, and they go down to the temple in Jerusalem when the temple is standing. They're escorted by, scholars or at least students, because at this point, once the accusation has been leveled, because she has secluded herself with the person she was warned not to, the husband and wife are prohibited to each other. They can't be together until she goes through this ritual. She can divorce, but if they're going to stay together, she goes through this ritual at the temple. The priest, the Kohen there, reads to her the relevant verses from the Torah. Then he puts the paper with those verses written on them in a bowl of water, along with some dirt from the temple floor. Right? There's nothing lethal in that. But if she committed adultery and she drinks that bitter water, then it will kill her. Right? But if she's innocent, then she will survive the ordeal, and she will even bear children if she, was infertile before. That's the sota ritual. Okay, now there's another aspect of the sota ritual, because, she engaged in this immodest behavior, inappropriate behavior. So mida keneged mida, so there's going to be one other aspect to this, which we're going to read about right now, that she is publicly humiliated when she goes through that ritual. What does it say? Didn't we hear them say just the opposite? As we learned in a Mishna, sota, page 7a, with regard to a sota, the suspected adulteress, who was made to undergo the ordeal of the bitter waters. So it says, and the priest grabs hold of her clothing and pulls it without concern about what happens to it. If the clothes are torn, they are torn. If the stitches come apart, they come apart. And he pulls her clothing until he reveals her heart, meaning her chest. And then he unbraids her hair. So Rabbi Yehuda says, if her heart was attractive, the priest would not reveal it. And if her hair was attractive, he would not unbraid it. This seems to indicate that Rabbi Yehuda, who is concerned about the sexual thoughts of the people watching this ritual. Whereas the majority in that situation overruled Rabbi Yehuda and said, even if she's attractive, the Torah calls for, this ordeal, and, her top is ripped off and her hair is unbraided. Rabbah said, there in the case of the sota, this is the reason that Rabbi Yehuda says that the priest does not reveal the woman's chest or unbraid her hair. Perhaps the sota will leave the court having been proven innocent, and the young priests in the temple who saw her partially naked will become provoked by the sight of her. Here, in the case of a woman who is executed, right, by stoning, she is killed by being stoned. And there is no concern about the onlookers being provoked after her death. And the Gemara comments, and if you would say that the fact that she is killed is irrelevant to their having sexual thoughts because the onlookers, will remember that and then be provoked, turned on, in other words, with regard to other women that they might see, this is not a concern. As Rabbah says, it is learned as a tradition that the evil inclination controls only that which the eyes see. Very interesting. Rava says, is the contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yehuda and the other statement of Rabbi Yehuda difficult? While the contradiction between one statement of the rabbis and the other statement of the rabbis is not difficult, right? The rabbis say that the woman who is executed by stoning, and then they have to hang the corpse on a tree for the rest of that day. If it's a man who is executed naked, they hang him naked. But a woman who's executed is not, well, we're not even up to hanging yet, but she's not executed naked, right? A woman is not. But the sota is, right? She is humiliated with her chest and hair being exposed. So why are we not saying that there's a contradiction between the two statements of the rabbis? Right? Is it not difficult? There is also an apparent contradiction between the two rulings of the rabbis. As with regard to a sota, they are not concerned about sexual thoughts of onlookers, but with regard to a woman who is stoned, they are concerned. So rather, Rava says the contradiction between one statement of Rabbi Yehuda and the other statement of Rabbi Yehuda is not difficult, as we just explained the difference between the situation of the sota and that of the woman who is executed. And, says Rava, the contradiction between one ruling of the rabbis and the other ruling of the rabbis is also not difficult. With regard to a sota, the verse states that the other woman should be warned, right? This woman is being made an example of for the benefit of other women. Thus will I cause lewdness to cease out of the land, that all women may be chastened not to do like your lewdness, says the priest to the sota. This is a statement in Ezekiel 23:48. So in order to serve as an example and warning to other women, a woman suspected of adultery must undergo public disgrace. And therefore the concern about the sexual thoughts that her partially naked body might arouse is disregarded in light of this more important issue. And here, with regard to stoning, you have no chastening greater than this stoning itself. We don't need further chastening of the public. They're seeing this, criminal executed. And if you would say that the two forms of chastening, both stoning and humiliation, should be done to her, Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avu says, the verse states, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19:18, teaching that even with regard to a condemned prisoner, select a good, i.e. a compassionate death for him. Therefore, when putting a woman to death by stoning, she should not be humiliated in the process, right? So we're not going to impose anything beyond the requirements of the law as a punishment. However, it's easy for us to fall into the trap when we're reading about the execution of a person at a public execution, to maybe feel sorry for them. There's a saying elsewhere in the Talmud, I don't know if it's in the Talmud, but it's certainly in Jewish literature, that if you are kind to the cruel, you will end up being cruel to the kind, right? You can't misplace your morality, right? There is a death penalty. There's a reason for the death penalty. And there are times and places to apply the death penalty. And when we apply it, that's righteousness. Now, as we've seen, the courts will go out of their way to save a condemned person from execution if there is any way to avoid it. But having gone through a process that is, absolutely designed in every possible way, as we read over and over and over again, to save the defendant from being condemned to execution, and nevertheless they are condemned to execution, okay, well, that's a person who deserves to be executed. We're not going to feel sorry for them when they're being executed. In fact, their execution is a kindness to them because it may provide an atonement for them if they atone at least at the last minute, right? We just read yesterday that we offered to them to confess their crime right before they are executed, right? And so that will set them up to still have some kind of a portion in the world to come, in the world of souls. Okay. But however, having fulfilled the requirement of executing them, we don't do anything more than is required. As we just read, select a good death for them. This is a way you fulfill, one of the ways you fulfill the commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, the Gemara suggests, let us say that whether one rules in accordance with the statement of Rav Nachman is a dispute between Tanaim. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is no mitzvah to select a compassionate death. So the Gemara refutes this. No, it may be that everyone agrees with the opinion of Rav Nachman. And here they disagree about this. One sage, meaning the rabbis, holds minimizing one's degradation is better for him than seeing to his physical comfort, i.e., than minimizing his physical pain. Therefore, the rabbis view the more compassionate death as one without degradation, even if wearing clothes will increase the pain of being executed. Why would being clothed when you're executed by stoning increase the pain of being executed, because the clothes will absorb the blow and prolong the death. And the other sage, Rabbi Yehuda, holds that one's physical comfort is better for him than minimizing his degradation. And therefore, the one being executed prefers to be stoned unclothed without any chance of the clothing prolonging his death, even though this increases his degradation. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Now, Mishnah number 5. The place of stoning from which the condemned man is pushed to his death is a platform twice the height of an ordinary person. Right? So now we've talked about a bunch of times that what does it mean, death by stoning? It means that you are pushed off of a height and you fall on a rock. Basically, your head should fall on a rock so that it should be that your death should be quick. But if you don't die from that fall, then, as we'll see, it might be a little bit more like we imagined, that stones are applied. But again, it's not that you're stood against a wall and people throw rocks at you. That is not what stoning means. Now we're going to learn what stoning means. Right? So the place of stoning from which the condemned man is pushed to his death is a platform twice the height of an ordinary person. It's not so tall. Right? Twice the height of an ordinary person. I'm 6 feet. I'm probably a little bit on the tall side. I imagine that in the ancient world, I'd probably be even a little bit more on the tall side. Okay, so just think of the height of an average man in the ancient world. Twice that. It's not so high. But that's what they're pushed off of. He is made to stand at the edge of the platform, and then one of the witnesses who testified against him, so the witness has to be involved personally, pushes him down by the hips so that he falls face up onto the ground, meaning on his back. If he turned over onto his chest with his face downward, the witness turns him over onto his hips. And if he dies through this fall to the ground, the obligation to stone the transgressor is fulfilled. And if the condemned man does not die from this fall, the second witness takes the stone that has been prepared for this task and throws it on his chest. And if he dies with the throwing of this first stone, the obligation to stone the transgressor is fulfilled. And if he does not, it's more like drops it on his chest. And if he does not die with the verb that's being used here in the English is casting. And if he does not die with the casting of this stone, then his stoning is completed by all of the Jewish people, i.e. by all the people who are assembled for the execution. As it is stated, the hand of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. Deuteronomy 17:7. That's the Mishnah. Now let's learn a little bit more detail about the process of execution by stoning. A Tana taught in a Baraisa, adding together the height of the platform, which is twice the height of an ordinary person, and the condemned man's own height. Okay, so his head, let's just say, for round numbers, it's 6 feet. Right? So twice that height, 12 feet. So he's standing on a platform, 12 feet off the ground, and his head is, 6 feet above that. So more or less, his head is at the level of 18 feet above the ground when they throw him off. Now, if his head strikes the ground, he certainly could easily die because he's being dropped on a rock. Okay. So adding together the height of the platform, which is twice the height of an ordinary person, the condemned man's own height, it turns out that there is a height here of 3 times the height of an ordinary person. And the Gemara asks, do we really need all that height to kill him? Meaning so much height. The reason I'm just surprised is because these days you see videos all the time of these guys who do parkour. I mean, they jump off, things that are 20 feet high and jump and roll or grab a pole. I mean, they jump off things much higher than that and somehow they're okay. But they're parkour athletes who are incredibly trained. People fall in their bathtub and die all the time. So you don't even need such a height in order for a person to die. And that's why the Gemara is asking, do we really need so much height to kill him? And so the Gemara raised a contradiction to this Baraisa from what was taught in a Mishna tractate Bava Kama, page 50b, when discussing the laws of damage caused by a pit. Why does the Torah specify a pit when one is liable for the damage caused by any type of excavation that he digs into the ground? You leave a hole in the road and somebody trips over and hurts themselves, you're going to be liable. Why are we talking about a pit? This teaches that just as a pit that is of sufficient depth to cause one's death from falling into it is at least 10 handbreadths deep, so too other excavations that are sufficient depth to cause one's death may be no less than 10 handbreadths. So the height at which we worry about a person falling and dying is 40 inches, right? A handbreadth is about 4 inches, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 10 handbreadths, that's about 40 inches, right? A little bit more than 3 feet. A person can fall from a height of 3 feet and die very easily. So if a fall of 10 handbreadths is sufficient to kill a person, why must the platform from which the condemned man is pushed be twice the height of an ordinary person? Rav Nachman says that Rabba Bar Avu says, the verse states, you shall love your neighbor as good, meaning a compassionate death for him. Therefore, even though the one being executed is likely to die from a fall from a lesser height, a platform is built that is twice the height of an ordinary person in order to ensure a quick and relatively painless death. And the Gemara challenges, if so, they should raise the platform even higher. And the Gemara answers, this is not done because if the condemned man were pushed from a higher platform, he would become seriously disfigured. And this would no longer be considered a compassionate form of death. The Mishnah teaches that one of the witnesses who had testified against the condemned party pushes him off the platform. Concerning this law, the sages taught in a Baraisa, from where is it derived that the punishment of stoning can be fulfilled by pushing the condemned party from a high place so that he dies by his fall? Doesn't sound like that's what stoning is. So now, finally, we're asking the question, how do we know that pushing a person off a platform fulfills the obligation to execute someone by stoning? And the verse states, with regard to those who crossed the boundaries that were set up around Mount Sinai and touched the mountain, right? In other words, when God appeared at Mount Sinai, before the day of giving Torah at Mount Sinai, God warned Moses, and Moses warned the people, do not approach the mountain. Right? There's like a border around the mountain. God's presence is going to be on that mountain, and the mountain shook and the mountain roared, and people saw the sounds, right, and heard the lightning, and God's unbelievable manifestation of God's presence, which really shook the world. But the people were warned, do not cross this line. If you do, you'll die. And when that warning was given, how was it worded? The verse states, with regard to those who might have crossed, who were warned not to cross the boundaries that were set up around Mount Sinai and touch the mountain, take heed to yourselves that you not go up onto the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shall be thrown down. Exodus 19:12 and 13. And from where is it derived that this punishment can be fulfilled with actual stoning? The verse states, he shall be stoned. And from where is it derived that this punishment is sometimes fulfilled by both stoning and by pushing? If the transgressor did not die from his fall, he is then stoned. How do we know that? The verse states, he shall be stoned or shall be thrown down, right? So stoned, whatever that means exactly, or being thrown down are equated. And so he's thrown down, and if that doesn't kill him, we finish him off by stoning. And what is stoning? Now it's dropping rocks on him. And from where is it derived that if the condemned man died from the pushing off of the platform, that the obligation to stone him has been fulfilled, and there is no further need to actually stone him? Because the verse states, or shall be thrown down, with the term or indicating that only one of the two options must be fulfilled. You don't need to do both. And from where is it derived that this is the law not only at Mount Sinai, which was a unique situation in history, but even with regard to future generations? Now on page 45b. The verse states, he shall be stoned. Sakol yisakel. A doubling, right, of verbs for in emphasis. But here, when the verb is doubled, the tense changes. Sakol yisakel. With the doubled verb form indicating that this law applies in all places and at all times. The Mishnah taught that if the condemned party does not die from his fall, the second witness takes the stone that had been prepared for this task and casts it on his chest. So the Gemara asks, does the witness take the stone by himself? But isn't it taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, a stone was there with a weight that could be lifted only by two men? It's a big rock, right? A rock that a single person cannot pick up. That's a pretty big rock, right? I mean, a single person, I could pick up a rock. I mean, there's a picture of me holding a rock, that was 50 pounds. A strong guy could pretty easily, the strongman competitions, forget it. They could pick up a rock hundreds of pounds. But a normal person, who's a man, 50, 60, 70 pounds, pretty readily. And now it's not. It cannot be picked up by one person. It needs two people. You're talking about a rock, 100 pounds at least. That's a rock. And that's what they're going to drop on this guy after he was pushed off the platform if he didn't die from the fall. Okay, so it's a big rock. The witness takes it and places it, casts it on the condemned party's chest. I'm sorry, where? Right, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, a stone was there with a weight that could be lifted only by two men. The witness takes it and places, i.e. casts it, on the condemned party's chest, and if he dies with the casting of this stone, the obligation to stone the transgressor is fulfilled. So this indicates that one individual could not lift the stone by himself. So how is this second witness going to do it? And the Gemara answers, and according to your reasoning, the baraisa itself should pose a difficulty for you, as it first states that the stone was of a weight that could be lifted only by two men. And then it says that the witness takes it and places it on the condemned party's chest, apparently acting alone. How do you reconcile that? So rather, both the Mishnah and the baraisa should be explained like this. The second witness lifts the stone together with the other witness, but then the second witness alone casts it so that it should fall with force upon the condemned party's chest, as two people working together cannot aim their throw with precision. Sounds like the guy fell off the platform. He's still alive. They're going to lift this big rock. Probably there's some little platform there where they're going to balance the rock, and then that other witness is going to push the rock off that platform, and it's going to drop on this condemned man, and now he's going to die from that rock. And the Mishnah teaches, and if the condemned party does not die with the first stone, then his stoning is completed by all of the Jewish people. And the Gemara raises a difficulty, but isn't it taught in a baraisa, never did a person repeat the stoning, as the condemned party always died with the first stone cast upon him, right? After he fell off that platform, if he's still alive, when they drop that big rock on him, that's the end. No one ever survived that, and further stones needed to be cast. And the Gemara answers, did we say that they acted so? Rather, we said that if the condemned party did not die with the casting of the first stone, and it was necessary to try again, which never happened, but if it had happened, then the stoning would be completed by all of the people who assembled for the execution. And the master said in the baraisa that a stone was there, indicating that a special stone was kept in the place of stoning and used time and time again for this purpose. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa, the stone with which the condemned party was stoned, and the tree on which his corpse was hung, or the sword with which he was killed in an execution by sword, or the cloth with which he was strangled in an execution by strangulation? All of them are buried together with him. The implement of execution is buried with him. So how could this stone be used over and over again? And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to teach that after the stones were buried with the transgressor, they would prepare other stones and bring them to the place of stoning in their place. They always had that type of stone. The Baraisa teaches that all of the items used in the execution are buried together with the transgressor. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in another Baraisa that they are not buried together with the transgressor? So Rav Papa said, what does the Baraisa mean when it says that these items are buried together with him? They are not actually buried with him in the same grave. Rather, they are buried within his grasp, i.e. in the area surrounding his grave. And this also teaches that we bury the condemned person. Even though he had such a serious crime that he was executed, he still merits to be buried. New subject. Shmuel says, if the witness's hands were severed after the transgressor was sentenced to be stoned, right? In other words, if somehow one of the witnesses got into an accident between the time when the condemned man was sentenced to be executed, right, and the execution. So a mega freak occurrence where between the time of the execution, between the time of the condemnation, the verdict of the court, and the execution, which we've heard before is on the same day, somehow one of the witnesses had his hands severed. Why would that matter? Because it's the witness who has to push him off the platform, and the other witness, if he's still alive, who pushes that big rock onto him. So what happens if somehow the witness loses his hands and is unable to push? If the witness's hands were severed after the transgressor was sentenced to be stoned, so that the witness can no longer stone him personally, then the transgressor is exempt from punishment and is not executed. And what is the reason for this? This is because I need to fulfill what is stated in the verse. The hand of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death. Deuteronomy 17:7. It says the hand of the witness. And in this case, it would not be possible. And the Gemara asks, well, if that is so, that the witnesses themselves must stone the transgressor or else the sentence is not carried out, well, what if the witnesses lacked hands from the outset when they offered their testimony? Are they also disqualified? And the Gemara answers, no. There it is different. As the verse states, the hand of the witnesses, indicating that the hands that were there already when the witnesses gave their testimony must throw the first stone when the transgressor is executed. If the witnesses already lacked hands at the time of their testimony, then others can cast the first stone. Now, the Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Shmuel from what is taught in a Mishna, tractate Makos, page 7a. In any place where two witnesses testify before a court, and they say, we testify about so-and-so that his death sentence was issued in such and such a court, and so-and-so and so-and-so were his witnesses. So he is executed. There is no need to retry him, right? If for some reason the convict, maybe while he was walking out to be executed, escaped, and then later they catch him, and witnesses come and say, we were there at that trial when this guy was sentenced to die. This was the court, this was the place, these were the witnesses who testified in that trial, then we don't have to retry him. Then he would be executed. Common sense. And there is no need to retry him. But this seems to indicate that the transgressor is put to death even if the original witnesses are not there to throw the first stone. So the Gemara explains that Shmuel interpreted the Mishnah as referring to a case where the witnesses who testify about the transgressor's conviction in a different court are the same witnesses who had testified about him in his original trial, and they are present to throw the first stone. So now the Gemara raises another difficulty against the opinion of Shmuel. But do we really need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written? But isn't it taught in a baraisa? The verse, with regard to a murderer, states, "He that smote him shall be put to death, for he is a murderer." Numbers 35:21. From that verse, I have derived only that the murderer is put to death with the mode of execution written concerning him. That is not stoning, that is decapitation by a sword. From where do I derive that if you cannot put him to death with the mode of execution written concerning him, for example, if he is escaping from the court, you can put him to death with any mode of execution with which you can put him to death, right? If for some reason he's gotten away and now the only way to kill him is with a bow and arrow, you kill him with the bow and arrow. How do we know that? The verse states, "He that smote him shall be put to death." Mot yumat. One of the doublings of a verb. How important it is. Indeed he shall be smote. Indeed he shall be put to death. Where the doubled verb teaches that he is put to death in any case, by any mode of execution. Here too, the condemned party should be executed even if the witnesses cannot cast the first stone. So why are you saying that it only matters if it's them? So the Gemara answers there concerning a murderer, it is different. As the verse explicitly states, "He that smote him shall be put to death," which serves to include all modes of execution. It's covered by another verse. So the Gemara asks, but why not learn from this law a principle that can be applied in all cases of capital punishment? The Gemara responds, this case does not prove a principle, because the laws of the murderer and of the blood redeemer, sometimes said in English, the redeemer of blood, the goel ha'adam. What's that? The goel ha'adam is the closest relative of somebody who is killed. If the victim of the homicide, right, if it was a negligent homicide, right, meaning that the person who killed him, it wasn't, with malice aforethought, wasn't an intentional killing, but it was a negligent killing. The guy does bear culpability. So that's the manslaughterer. The manslaughterer can flee to the city of refuge. But before he reaches the city of refuge, the goel hadam, the redeemer of blood, the closest relative, is permitted, and some would say obligated, to kill the negligent murderer, the manslaughterer. That's the goel hadam. What about in the case of a murderer? This is a question we were talking about recently. If he's permitted and perhaps even obligated to kill the manslaughterer, Kal v'chomer, how much more so should he be obligated or at least permitted to kill the intentional murderer? But the intentional murderer, he's going to be killed by a court who sentences him to execution, unlike the manslaughterer. So it might be that the goel hadam doesn't have that right. Rather, the goel hadam gets to be the executioner, like decapitating the murderer. Okay. That's general talk. Let's see what's going on right here. The Gemara responds, that case that you're talking about now does not prove a principle because the laws of the murderer and the blood redeemer, i.e. a relative of one who was killed, who takes it upon himself to redeem his relative's death, these are two verses that come as one. And the rule is that two verses that come as one do not teach a principle. In other words, if a law is stated in the Torah with regard to two individual cases, the law is understood to apply only to those cases. Had the law applied to all other relevant cases as well, it would not have been necessary for the Torah to give two examples. The fact that two cases are mentioned indicates that those two cases are the exceptions rather than the rule, and so this rule that's mentioned in the Torah would only apply in those two cases, like the execution of the murderer and the role of the redeemer of blood. The Gemara explains, The law that capital punishment need not necessarily be imposed in accordance with the Torah's specific instructions, meaning if he's escaping from the court, you could shoot him with a bow and arrow, even though the proper execution for him is decapitation by the sword, that it's permitted to shoot him with the bow and arrow in that situation. This is taught with regard to two cases, that of the murderer and that of the blood redeemer. Right, the Goel Hadam, when he's permitted, perhaps obligated to kill the manslaughterer, doesn't say how he needs to do it. He can kill him however he wants. And the case of a murderer is this law that we said. With regard to the case of a blood redeemer, what is it? As it is taught in the Baraisa, the verse states, the blood redeemer shall slay the killer when he meets him. Numbers 35:21. And the mitzvah of redeeming the death caused by a manslaughterer falls on the blood redeemer, a relative of the victim. And from where is it derived that if the victim has no blood redeemer, it's not even the method of killing. Here the question is, well, what if the victim didn't have a close relative who would act as his blood redeemer? From where is it derived that a victim has no blood redeemer? The court appoints a blood redeemer for him, as it is stated, when he meets him, which teaches that in any case, he shall slay the murderer, whether he is a relative or a court-appointed blood redeemer. These laws are very counterintuitive, right? I mean, these are not easy to understand. You know, when we're talking about the blood redeemer, I mean, it's a chok, right? It's meaning the kind of law that is super rational, like we can't eat milk and meat, like the ashes of a red heifer purify one from coming into contact with a corpse, which is the sort of, archetypal example of a chok, the kind of law that we do it because God said so, even though we don't really understand God's reasoning. So we go through so much. The Torah goes to such lengths to tell us, that you just cannot execute somebody without testimony, witnesses, trial, etc. But in the case of the negligent killer, the manslaughterer, the Goel Hadam, the blood redeemer, has this right to kill him, extrajudicially. I mean, in a sense, it's not extrajudicially because the Torah provides for it. Now, you might say, okay, the Torah is speaking to people in the language of people. In other words, it especially in the ancient world where the blood feud, and in some parts of the world still today, where somebody kills a member of your family, you're just not going to let it go. And you're going to go, kill somebody from their family, or the one who killed the member of your family. Like that was just the way of the world back then. And perhaps the Torah was just, addressing its system in the world it was delivered, where you had to provide for the blood redeemer because there was going to be a blood redeemer. But here we're hearing that, well, if the man didn't have a relative, okay, so there is no one who's just, as a matter of, erasing the stain on the honor of the family, will just go in the heat and go kill the killer. But if he has no relative, there's no one like that. And yet, it says that the court would appoint a blood redeemer. Hard to understand, but it's in order to fulfill the precept of the Torah. This is what our sages said, who are much, much wiser than I, and who lived much closer in time to the giving of Torah. They understood better. Let's keep going. All right. If the victim has no blood redeemer, the court appoints a blood redeemer for him. How do we know this? As it is written, when he meets him, which teaches that in any case, he shall slay the murderer, whether he's a relative or a court-appointed blood redeemer. Mar Kashisha, the son of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashi, and do we not need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written? Right? It wasn't written to use that kind of execution or to have this particular, the relative, kill, and yet we still fulfill the precept. So Mar Kashisha is saying, what are you talking about? We have to fulfill things exactly as written. And do we not need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written? But didn't we learn in a Mishna that we'll encounter on page 71 of Sanhedrin with regard to the stubborn and rebellious son? If one of the boy's parents is without a hand, or is mute, or lame, or blind, or deaf, the boy is not rendered a stubborn and rebellious son. It's a very interesting law that we'll encounter in a few weeks. The gluttonous son who is, just, he's so wayward and so addicted to his evil inclination that the parents bring him to the gate of the city and say, this is our son. He's a wanton, glutton and drunkard and rebellious. And then the court sentences him to die and they kill him, even though he hasn't actually committed any kind of death penalty offense. But as we'll learn when we reach that law, the sages, looked at the requirements of that law and made them so onerous that is a particular law that's in the Torah but has never, ever in the history of the Jews and the Torah been carried out. Very interesting case, as we'll see. But here, the point is, the law is derived as it is stated. Deuteronomy 21:19, then shall his father and his mother lay hold of him and bring him to the elders of his city and the gate of his place. And this serves to teach, his mother and his father lay hold of him, but not those without a hand who cannot grab him, and bring him out, but not those who are lame and cannot take him out. And they shall say to the elders of the city, this is our son. This, our son, is stubborn and rebellious. He does not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. In Deuteronomy 21:20, and the verse serves to teach, and they shall say, but not, they shall say, the parents shall say, but if the parents are mute, they can't, so the law doesn't apply. And they say, this is our son, but they say this, and if they're blind, they can't see him when they would say that. So then he gets off, because they cannot point to the boy, and they need to say, he does not obey our voice. But if they are mute or deaf and can't speak, then they, again, disqualified. The law would not apply. Now, what is the reason in all these cases that the boy is not rendered a stubborn and rebellious son? Is it not because we need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written? And this principle should hold true with regard to the other verses as well. So the Gemara rejects this explanation. No, there in the case of the stubborn and rebellious son, it is different, as the entire verse is superfluous. Therefore, all the conditions inferred from the verse must be precisely met, or else the boy cannot be rendered a stubborn and rebellious son. But we cannot apply that principle to these other verses that we're discussing. So the Gemara suggests coming here a proof from what is taught in a Baraisa with regard to an idolatrous city, the majority of whose inhabitants engage in idol worship, about which the verse states, and you shall gather all the spoil of it into the midst of the open place of the city, and shall burn with fire both the city and the entire plunder taken in it. Deuteronomy 13:17. So if the city does not have an open place, it is not rendered an idolatrous city. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says, if it does not have an open place, they make an open place for it. So the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree only with regard to this detail. That one sage, Rabbi Yishmael, holds that we need an open place that existed from the outset when the idolatry was committed in order to destroy the city according to the procedure listed in the Torah for destroying a city of Jews that became majority idolatrous so that we destroy the whole city and burn everything in it. While the other sage, Rabbi Akiva, holds that an open place that exists now is like an open place that existed from the outset. But everyone agrees that we need to fulfill what is stated in the verse exactly as it is written. You need an open place. The Gemara answers, this issue is the subject of a dispute between Tanaim. As we learned in the Mishna, Tractate Negayim 14:9, concerning the purification process of the mitzvah, during the course of which blood and oil must be applied to his right thumb, right big toe, and right ear. If the mitzvah has no right thumb, right big toe, or right ear, he can never attain ritual purity, as he cannot fulfill the conditions of the verse. Rabbi Eliezer says, in such a case, the priest may apply the blood and oil to the place where the missing finger, toe, or ear should have been. And the mitzvah has thereby fulfilled his obligation, and he, is purified from his tzuras. Rabbi Shimon says the priest may apply it to his left thumb, left big toe, or left ear, and the mitzvah thereby fulfilled his obligation. The first Tana apparently holds that the Torah's instructions must be fulfilled exactly as they are written, while both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon disagree and say that when this is impossible, those requirements are dispensable and we do the next best thing. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5, here in chapter 6, Tractate Sanhedrin. Mishnah 6. The corpses of all those who are stoned are hung after their death. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. Not hung from a gallows, but suspended, from a hook on a tree or from a branch, right? This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. And the rabbis say, the majority who overrule Rabbi Eliezer, only the corpse of the blasphemer who has cursed God and the corpse of the idol worshiper are hung. The corpse of a man is hung facing the people, but the corpse of a woman out of modesty is hung facing the tree. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. The rabbis say the corpse of a man is hung, but the corpse of a woman is not hung. Rabbi Eliezer said to the rabbis, did Shimon ben Shattach not hang in Ashkelon women who were found guilty of witchcraft, proving that the corpse of a woman who is executed is also hung on a tree after the execution? And they said to him, no proof can be brought from that example, as he hanged 80 women on that day. And the law is that the same court may not judge even two people charged with capital transgressions on the same day. It is therefore clear that he was not acting in accordance with Torah law, but rather his execution of those 80 women was an extraordinary punishment necessitated by unusually pressing circumstances. That story is told in another place and in detail in Talmud Yerushalmi, but suffice to say that in the details of that case, they really were practicing sorcery and doing all kinds of evil wickedness. He tried to avoid doing the punishment, and the circumstances became such that it had to be done, and done quickly. That was the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that the corpses of all those who are killed by stoning are hung after their death. Sages taught in a related Baraisa. The verse states, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death and he is put to death, you shall hang him on a tree. Or it says, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death and he is put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree. Deuteronomy 21:22. One might have thought that the corpses of all those who are put to death are hung on a tree. To counter this, the verse states, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree. For he that is hung is a curse of God. Deuteronomy 21:23. Teaching that just as the blasphemer who is liable to be punished by stoning is hung after his death, so too all those who are liable to be punished by stoning are later hung. But those who are liable to be executed in other ways are not hung after their death. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. And the rabbis say, just as the blasphemer who denies the principle of belief in God is hung after his death, so too all who deny the principle of belief in God are hung after they die. But others, even if they are liable to be punished by stoning, are not hung after they are put to death. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara clarifies. With regard to what do the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer disagree? The rabbis interpret the verses based on the principle of generalizations and details, one of the methods by which the Torah is interpreted. And Rabbi Eliezer interprets them based on the principle of amplifications and restrictions, a different approach to biblical exegesis, which in this situation yields different results. How so? The rabbis expound the verses based on the principle of generalizations and details. So, the phrase, and he is put to death, and you shall hang him, this is a generalization, as no particular offense is specified. The phrase, for he that is hung is a curse of God, this is a detail, as a specific transgression is mentioned, one who curses God, a blasphemer. Where the generalization and the detail, were the generalization and the detail next to each other in the same verse, we would apply the principle of generalizations and details and say that the generalization includes only that which is stated in the detail. Therefore, this transgressor, the blasphemer, yes, his corpse is subject to being hung after he is executed, but the corpse of anyone else is not. Now that the generalization and the detail are distant from each other, i.e. they are written in different verses, the verses serve to include one who is found guilty of idol worship, as he is similar to the blasphemer in all matters. and he too is subject to be hung after he is executed. And Rabbi Eliezer, by contrast, interprets the verses based on the principle of amplifications and restrictions. So the phrase, and he is put to death and you shall hang him, this is an amplification. The phrase, for he that is hung is a curse of God, this is a restriction. Where the amplification and the restriction right next to each other, we would apply the principle of amplifications and restrictions and include only one who is guilty of idol worship, as he is similar to the blasphemer in all ways. But now that these phrases are distant from each other, the verses serve to include all those who are liable to be stoned to death. All of their corpses are hung after they are put to death, according to Rabbi Eliezer. But we follow the rabbis, and only the corpses of the blasphemer and the idol worshiper, after they are stoned to death, would then also be hung on a tree. That's where we will knock off, and God willing, continue tomorrow, Sunday, at the regular Sunday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. A few comments and questions. Sharon, why make the sota ritual public at all? I think they answered that. Because the humiliation is meant to chasten, other women. Don't put yourself in a situation. Don't seclude yourself with some man who's not your husband. All the more so after your husband said, do not seclude yourself with that man. People are suspecting you of committing idolatry with him. Do not put yourself in a seclusion situation with that man. And then she did. So the sota ritual, as delineated in the Torah, is a public thing. It is public. It's run right in the courtyard of the temple. And I think the reason why it's public seems to be the chastening effect of it and the degradation. And perhaps even, it's a weird thing, right? But since it says that if she's innocent, she will have children, perhaps a woman, who is infertile might create this situation in order to have kids, but even to have kids would not go through that. And so perhaps that's another reason. That's just speculation. But why is it public? Because the Torah says so. The reason why the Torah says so, the sages are, surmising. Bill, I will concede that the sages would certainly know more than I about this, but I will admit to being somewhat skeptical about the idea that the evil inclination has dominion only over what's seen by the eye. Or say rather, I'd like to hear this tradition expounded, since I suspect there's more to it than the surface meaning. Exactly. I want to hear more about that. What does it mean? The evil inclination has only dominion. It was said in the case of, we're not worried that somebody might see, a woman unclothed, and the sages don't. They say that if a woman is going to be sentenced to be stoned, she's dressed. Only in the case of the sota is it naked. So in the case, the one who's sentenced to be executed, you're not worried that, somebody who might see that might have lewd thoughts because she's naked about her later, right? It doesn't matter because she's going to be dead anyway. But in the case of the sota, they might see her again later. Now, it's interesting. It's said that the priests, the young priests who are present. So in that sense, Sharon, maybe that addresses your question. If they're talking about priests might see it, well, what about other people who might be there? Sounds like maybe, they did in the temple courtyard, but it's not like they invite the public to see it. I know there was a scene like that in that show Game of Thrones. I didn't watch that show, but I've heard about that scene. But it's not like that, right? It's in the temple courtyard, but it's not a public spectacle. Bill, I wonder if it would be equally appropriate to say that while we have a sort of natural compassion for the executed, the important thing is to discipline the natural impulse so that it may be properly directed. The material difference between, for example, saying, oh, if only he had been executed in this way, which is improper, and saying, oh, if only he hadn't committed this sin, which is proper. So the former makes us squeamish in the face of justice. The latter makes us question what we, as a society, could do to limit the temptation to sin, to increase our communal righteousness, and so on. I like that. Very good, Bill. Very good. Joe, maybe the blood redeemer is a deterrent to the person to stay in the city of refuge, an intimidator. Excellent. Very good. Very good. right? That's like, in other words, a way to try to understand that hook is we want the manslaughter to stay in the city of refuge. If there's no blood redeemer, there's no incentive, right? It's only the blood redeemer who has this right to kill him if he leaves the city of refuge. No one else has that right. So if there's no blood redeemer, he's not going to stay in that city of refuge. He won't obey the exile. Very good. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you, Joe. Joe, were corpses tied up and hung by their feet? I believe not. I think because I saw a figure from this discussion that's coming tomorrow, but I think there was like a picture of some kind of a statue. It seems like with the hands tied and then just like kind of like on a stubby branch, hung by that. So we'll learn more about that tomorrow. I haven't read ahead. Somebody is talking about the musical scale known as that the rabbis speak when elucidating Mishna, Torah, Zohar, Torah. I mean, that sinks. If we say that he's going to go here, but he doesn't go there, why would we say that therefore, which I do, when I go to Shiurim, that's how the rabbis speak, and I picked it up and I share it that way with you. I don't really know enough about music to talk about the way the notes move in that scale, but I'll say that what's so valuable about that kind of sing-song voice is that when you're stating a question or a statement for that matter, but where you're giving sort of three reasons that lead to a conclusion, and sometimes the reasons are very long. The first reason includes a quote from a verse and an allusion to another place in the Torah. And the second reason includes a quote from the Torah and an allusion and a connection to another verse in another place. And the third reason does the same. Then when we reach the final conclusion, so it's to help the listener know when we've moved to, the three reasons to the conclusion, or that all three of these things go together and add up to the conclusion. Since those sentences might be very long, the sing-song really helps the listener sort of grasp where we are in a long sentence with lots of clauses. I think that's why we do it. That's certainly why I do it. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific. There's a Super Bowl tomorrow. Yeah, well, we don't change the time of Dafyomi for the Super Bowl. Hopefully the game will be over then. If there's any adjustment, I'll let you know. But I'm a football fan, but I plan to teach the class on time. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers. Have a great day.